Joel Wendt here, more on my blog on politics. This is a sort of follow-up in a kind of way to the Scott Brown matter. Mostly I'm concerned with one of the things that's happening in a lot of the evaluations of the meaning of that. Of course, one can go to one's favorite place on the internet or newspaper and have reflected to ourselves something we know we're already going to like because it coincides with our own view of the world. But if you want to think deeper into what's going on in political life, you have to have a broader perspective. You have to look at multiple points of view, and you have to be able to be willing to ask questions of yourself about how accurate your own opinions are. It's simply not enough to just have opinions and knee-jerk reactions, whether they're conservative or liberal. A certain amount of thought is called for. In any event, what I want to talk about today is polls. Most of us are familiar with polls. Polls get thrown at us all the time. For example, one could encounter in the aftermath of Scott Brown's election to the Senate in Massachusetts, certain kinds of polling data were put forward by various reporters, and the polling data would say this or that, or imply this or that was the meaning and significance of what the voters did. And one of the things we need to keep in mind, and this is sort of the dark, dirty secret of polls, which anybody who really studies polls understands, and certainly the pollsters understand, and why they put forward their particular brand of idiocy without warning us that it's only going to mean a very marginal thing in terms of helping us understand the world. I don't know, I guess there's maybe no ethical principles in pollsters. They have to make money, and of course the general paradigm in the political world is that these polls have meaning and its significance, and so you get constant reference to polls. And of course one poll will say another thing and another poll another, which ought to wake us up at least a little bit to the problem that maybe there's something going on here that's more problematic than just asking people a question like, well, let's imagine that the Scott Brown thing, and now there's exit polls, and so people come out and they're asked whether they're willing to take a poll about what they just voted on. And some will say sure, and some will say no, they're not interested in explaining themselves to anybody. And then the pollster will have his questions, and he probably has a little clipboard, and he has his questions on it because he has to write down the data that he collects, and then that's got to be centralized, and some computer is going to summarize it, and some pollster or manager of the poll is going to make a statement about what their results were. Well, the thing is that anybody that really does work in polls knows that you can influence greatly the outcome of a poll by the nature of the question you ask. And that's where the crux of the situation actually comes. What questions are being asked? Now, we get this a little bit in the polls. You get, well, do you like the direction the government is going? That would be one poll question that gets asked. Do you approve of how Obama is doing his job? Well, that's another poll that gets asked. Poll question. Now, the interesting thing is that you get two different percentage relationships for that. The last time I heard that announced on one of the evening news shows, the poll numbers for do you like the direction the country is going in, there were more positive responses than were do you think the president is doing his job. Now that gives you a clue. In a certain sense, if people were being consistent in their responses to polls, they would sort of form an identity between the direction the government is going and whether Obama is doing his job. But the fact that they respond to those two questions in a different way suggests that the question itself influences the response. When they think about it, they think a little bit differently. Well, is Obama doing his job? Well, they think about that in a certain way, and then if you ask them, is the government going in the direction you want it to go, well, they think about that and they get a slightly different answer. And you can pretty much look at polls and what pollsters do and get become very acquainted with the fact that it's possible for pollsters to create the results that they want to get by the way that they ask the questions and the context in which they ask the question. Now, their science, to the extent that it represents a science, is based on statistics. You know, and I think most of us have heard the cliche about, you know, there's lies and then damn lies and then there's statistics. The reducing of the public point of view about things to numbers in a poll is an abomination. It really doesn't have any meaning. It's about as useless as you can get. But it does represent a tool by those people who like to have this tool to promote a particular idea. So they like to go out and sponsor a poll. You know, when you go to Fox News, you'll get one kind of poll, and you'll go to New York Times and you get another kind of poll, and different networks will report their poll that maybe they've joined in with. You know, recently I think NBC and Wall Street Journal did a poll together. Now, what does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean anything, and it doesn't mean that they've actually got science going where they're telling us anything that has anything that has any information in it that's going to be useful to us. We've just gotten into this habit of having polls. Let's come at this from a slightly different direction. Okay, you go before the election. You've got Scott Brown and you've got Mrs. Coakley running for election, and at the beginning of the polls, before much advertising had been done, you got one result. Coakley was pretty much ahead based on the fact that there were more Democrats likely to vote for her, and that independent voters would prefer her to the unknown Mr. Brown. Now, is there a flaw in that? Well, there's a very big flaw in a certain sense if you think that that's going to tell you anything about what voters think. Because the only question that really would give a better picture of that would be if you said, well, do you like Mr. Brown or do you like Miss Coakley? And then you followed that up with the question, which also should be reported, do you think these are the best candidates that we could have? Now, how many people, regardless of their leanings for being a conservative or a Republican or a liberal or a Democrat or whatever categories you want to put them in, if you ask them a really thoughtful question of whether they think that the people that are running for office are really of the character they'd like to see running for office, well, we'd get something really different, wouldn't we? I mean, we could guess. I'd guess that the preference would kind of slide away, and a whole bunch of people would say, well, no, I don't think either of these turkeys really should have this office. You know, you could put Ted Kennedy in there. You could say, does either of these people going to give you the same confidence as Ted Kennedy was as your senator? Then you get another question that's asked in the polling process, and it illuminates more about what the voters think. And so then you get the after the fact questions, you get these really kind of interesting things that get said along those lines. And I'll tell you, it's a morass. More later.